Welcome to Wild Turkey Science, a podcast made possible by Turkeys for Tomorrow. I'm Dr. Marcus Lashley, Professor of Wildlife Ecology at the University of Florida.
And I'm Dr. Will Goolsby, Professor of Wildlife Ecology and Management at Auburn University. We're both lifelong hunters and devoted scientists who are passionate about hunting, managing, and researching wild turkeys.
In this podcast, we'll explore turkey research, speak to the experts in the field, and address the difficult questions related to wild turkey ecology and management.
Our goal
is to serve as your connection to wild turkey science.
What if I'm not ready?
I'm ready to talk about some bugs.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I was up there last time we were recording, jumping on the river, trying to throw things that look like bugs down the river and catch a fish. But now I'm thinking about bugs because we've got new information that's just been published relevant to turkeys and turkey poults and how many bugs are available to them, which for those of you all out there that are trying to catch up, or maybe you just started listening, we had an episode not too long back, we'll link it in the show notes, talking about our bug problems. I think there's some concern over insect populations, and we've talked about that in the context of turkeys and turkey poults in particular, because they're so dependent on insect availability. They're eating nearly exclusively insects, especially early in life, when they're rapidly growing skeletal structure and feathers.
Mm-hmm. And that's super important because it's not just starvation versus survival, but that diet quality also affects their ability to stay alive and escape predators and stay warm or stay cool, or whatever environmental challenges they have to deal with.
Yeah, now you said something recently when we were talking about this that reminded me of discussions we've had. 2 weeks, 3 weeks, somewhere, that first few weeks of life, they're growing really rapidly, and 1 or 2 or 3 days difference in growth rate could be substantial.
Yeah, I think
of how it conveys their survival.
Yeah. I think I mentioned something along those lines in our last episode where I said, imagine sleeping out in the woods on the ground for 3 nights when basically everything out there can eat you. 3 nights doesn't sound that long, but if we can get them up in a tree sooner, that's obviously better.
If it gets a little too cold, you die. If it gets a little too warm, you die. Everything thinks you're a snack. It's a hard time in life.
Yeah.
So, and I think it was some of Lovett's work, and maybe even, I can't remember now, where there's some work showing growth rate of poults, and that it, can be affected by the availability of high-quality diet.
And here's something else that we've mentioned before on the air that I want everybody to remember because it's super important, and I think it shows, or it puts the proper amount of emphasis on providing insects for poults more than anything else that I've ever heard. And it's that we see these huge increases in gobbler harvest 2 years after a cicada hatch, because that is kind of like, you can treat it as a case study to show that, oh yeah, there must not be enough insects to maximize turkey reproduction, because when we get more of them, it goes up. That means that it's not maxed out yet. So that tells us then we can use that information to inform our management and say, hey, on my property, I could probably benefit reproduction by adding insects.
Yeah, you may be sufficient to support reproduction, but you're probably not saturated, right?
Yeah.
You probably still could gain on your property from adding more insects.
Absolutely.
And I'm not talking about turning crickets out. I'm talking about... I saw a comment, somebody posted something here recently, and I was looking at the comments on the post, and somebody brought up the crickets again.
Oh yeah, the cricket comments have kept coming in pretty steadily since spring.
Yep.
I don't see that going away anytime soon.
Yeah.
So listen, folks, it's a lot cheaper to just grow the plants that attract the crickets versus buying them.
Well, in some cases, you might even get paid to do that,
There you go.
right? So we wanted to cover a recent publication that came out. I covered it on Instagram with a reel. Some people may have seen that. But when I saw it, I just thought, man, there we go. That's what we've been, kind of skirting all around this issue and didn't have that paper
Yeah.
that really outlines it in the context that we've been talking about it with insect abundance and some of these habitat management approaches. So since
You
we've been in this theme on poults and habitat management, I thought, man, this is a good time to just go right on into this. That
you know what I
publication
liked most about that video?
that I was in it.
Yes, that your big face was right down there in the bottom and center of the screen. That's my favorite part. I just had to throw that out there because I know you get
Yeah.
picked on for those talking head videos, but they get.
Yeah.
I tell you what though, I can't argue. They get the information out there.
Well, I'm one of those kind of people that I I guess I have thick skin because y'all pick a lot of my colleagues pick on me for doing things like that. But you know what? I can crank out more that way than I can in the other styles that I've tried over
I
the
know.
years. And it seems to be conveying the information and driving the same amount of interaction and questions, and
Right.
people seem to appreciate it. So, my mug being there front and center doesn't seem to be that distracting to people, and it's allowing me to get out content.
Well, here's the truth. Here's the truth on it that I'll admit is that I would have made a talking head video yesterday. I actually tried. No, Monday. Monday. I actually tried, but I'm too stupid to figure it out. I was like, hell, I guess these things are pretty good for communicating information. I'll try one. Because the thing is if the data that I was going to present, it was just a figure.
Yeah.
And I feel like when you just put a graph, right, is what most people think of them as. When you just put a graph in an Instagram post, nobody stops and reads it. And the
Mhm.
problem with that is it could be some of the best information they could ever read related to managing turkeys on their property.
Yeah.
But if they don't stop and read it, they're never going to get it, right?
That's
So,
right.
you've got to think of ways. I feel like if there's somebody talking on it and you turn it into a reel versus a still image of just a figure, that they're more likely to learn
Yeah.
something.
Well, and I think
It's just human nature.
it is, and I think the platform and the algorithms behind it are favorable for you. And one thing, especially when I started doing that one, I didn't expect to happen, but I guess it kind of makes sense. Is there are people that are interested and have gained from some of the stuff I've shared in the past, and they see it, and now they know, oh, I better take a look at it and see if it's something that's
Yeah,
of interest.
right.
Start to build the rapport with folks, and I guess we're kind of doing the same thing with wild turkey science. They're not going through and looking at every title necessarily and saying, yeah, I better
Right.
listen here or not
Right.
there. They know they've gained something in the past, or at least that's what our audience has been telling us. So they tune in.
But now they know when Lashley's face shows up on the
Yeah,
screen, there's
I
about to
see
be a
you floating. Yeah,
knowledge bomb drop. I mean, it's on its way right now.
yeah. Well, I will say, I don't know. It probably has nothing to do with me, but coincidentally, I started seeing a lot of floating head green screen stuff after I started doing that a lot.
Oh, did you?
Yeah,
In the wildlife space, or did you
yeah.
influence the whole industry?
No, just like in the game space. I
Oh, I
don't know if
thought.
I influenced them or not, but I started noticing it a lot after I did it.
Here, I'll pick at you one more question. How many followers do you have to get to before I can start calling you an influencer?
Well, that's not why I'm doing it. We'll really get information out
You
there.
are though. You're influencing people to manage turkeys the right way.
Yeah, well, that's what I'm trying to do.
Yeah, there you
So,
go.
and I can show you some tricks on
Not the
doing
right
just
way. That
one
that
it's like,
implies that there's a right and a wrong way, but better.
yeah.
Help you better
Yeah, I'm
achieve
just
your
trying to provide
objectives.
people with knowledge so they can make informed decisions on what they want to do.
There you go.
And I actually have a couple of deer related things coming. So
Oh,
I've been focused on turkeys for a while, and there's good information on other species as well, and we've got a few people out there that would like to hear about deer. So
Mm. I imagine one or two of our listeners may also deer hunt.
yeah, I don't know what's wrong with them. Well, let's get to business.
Yeah, so we always recommend thinning and burning for
I
turkeys.
mean, just constantly,
Right.
right? It's almost like a broken record, and I see it all over the internet. People commonly, that's the first thing out, thin and burn.
Yeah.
Or, we're starting to see other things now where forest and improvement, uh, restoration of woodland structure, or, like there's different ways to couch that. But essentially, what we're getting down to is get sunlight into the forest, down to the forest floor, and add fire.
Right.
And good things happen for a lot of
Right.
species we care about, like turkeys.
Yeah. Most of the time when we talk about that, we talk about it in the context of providing better concealment cover, or, the plant-based portion of their diet improving, right?
Yeah,
And now sometimes we talk about how that
certainly
translates
for
into
deer.
insects as well, but we don't talk about the insect component as directly, because that's another, step beyond monitoring the plant community responses, is monitoring the insect responses.
Right, and
And
that's
then
hard. I think that's harder to capture too.
yeah,
And
absolutely.
the people that have those skill sets and they're doing that kind of work, I think another problem that we have is we're in silos, right? And entomologists that have in-depth knowledge about this kind of stuff are not thinking about it from the perspective of turkeys, and that doesn't necessarily come across our desk.
Right.
Because I'm not actively looking for that information necessarily in entomological focused journals and things.
Yeah.
But in this case, this group of authors kind of linked the things together, and when I saw it, it immediately turned on the light bulb for turkeys. They
Mhm.
don't even talk about turkeys in the paper.
Well, that actually is always encouraging to me. I'm always happy to see it when there are papers published by other biologists and ecologists that are also recognizing the decline in early successional cover types across much of the United States, and the importance of those cover types to a
Mhm.
diverse array and suite of species. Because the more that we understand about how, practices that benefit turkeys also benefit other species, the greater adoption of those practices and
Yeah.
implementation of those practices we're going to see across the landscape.
Yeah, and I've talked about this in at great lengths with my colleagues and several occasions as an extension professional.
Right.
Just there are several younger extension, or not necessarily younger in age, but they've been in the career less time than me.
Yeah. Just early career folks.
Yeah, early career, and I've talked about you know from an extension perspective exactly what you're saying right there. We might have these holistic wildlife conservation objectives, right, as professionals, but it's often the case that our constituents, a private landowner, might be really focused on in terms of their objective. Like
Mhm.
they may just want more turkeys, and that's fine. That's
Mhm.
their prerogative to have an
Yeah.
objective and try to go after that. But what I have relayed to some of these other professionals and talked about at great length is, if you find things like we're focused on wild turkeys. There are a lot of landowners that really care about wild turkeys, and I care about turkeys, and I also care about wildlife just in general. And I know improving habitat management for poult rearing, for example, is probably going to have a cascading effect on a whole community of species that the landowner doesn't necessarily care about.
That's right.
But I'm trying to increase the adoption of practices that steward the resources, right?
Yeah.
And meet their objective at the same time. And,
Yeah.
couching it that way can be a really effective way to do that.
Absolutely. And I think that's a really fun thing for people too. I'll just throw this out as a side. I know y'all probably are ready for us to just get into the data, but um, if you're out there managing your property and you're doing some of these practices that we recommend, don't just focus on the turkeys and the deer. Focus, see if you can, download an app and start identifying some birds and see which birds show up that you've never seen before, or the
Yeah.
flowers that show up that you've never seen before, the insects. I mean, there's just all sorts of things that change in an ecosystem when you implement these practices, and it can be really interesting, and I think deepen your connection and appreciation for nature.
Yeah, and that's something that I have witnessed where I've worked with landowners and then they start making a lot of progress. And then all of a sudden, a couple of rare plant species that are ornate show up, or, a few birds that are really ornate colors that they've
Right.
never seen before. And then that becomes what they talk about.
Yeah.
Like that becomes the thing. Like, well, I can't believe that I've got these crazy things showing up,
Yeah.
but I was trying to make better poultry and
And
cover.
it's an evolution too, right? So maybe a guy
Yeah,
buys a property and, the first few or maybe couple years he's only going out there like January or February through May, right? Like
mm,
he's going out, he's listening, getting ready for turkey season, then he hunts. But then, if he starts getting into, seeing birds and understanding the different plants and all that stuff, it's all going to add up to he's spending more time out there. He
right,
understands his property better. He's going to
yeah,
be able to pick up on anything that's changing more quickly, and understand how it's going to benefit or
yeah,
subtract or detract from things, and then address that too.
right. Well, and I think, they like you said, it's an evolution. People start to either they didn't know they appreciated it, or they start to develop an appreciation of it when when it starts
Yeah.
showing up. Like when you have a really diverse bird community that are really ornate,
What
you
do you
start to
call
appreciate that.
Yeah.
So,
What do you call those birds, Marcus?
what's that?
What
Uh,
do you have a nickname for those birds?
which birds?
Well, you said when you have a really diverse bird community, and I assumed you were talking about songbirds.
Um,
A slang term for them that.
are you are you thinking of one that is eluding
Well,
me?
no, 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 no. I was just gonna throw out that in the past I was the same way, like I didn't
Oh yeah,
really have an appreciation for those, and I was gonna illustrate that point by saying, a lot of us in wildlife, we refer to them as dicky birds, right? It's those dicky birds over there because they're
yeah,
not the important ones. The important ones are the ones we hunt and shoot, right?
yeah,
But I don't think you can work in this field for very long without inherently developing that
yeah.
appreciation over time. Just because when I started learning birds, it just and plants too. I think birds and plants both are
Mhm.
one of those things that's so easily observable, and it just makes your day outside more enjoyable when you
Yeah.
know something about them.
Well, and I was the same way. That is the word that came to mind for me, but I didn't want to say it on the air. But yeah, we developed that. But I've seen landowners develop that same appreciation because we inherently like more. I mean, just I'm talking about humans in general. We inherently like high diversity.
Yeah,
Like it's maybe not of things that are parasites or that bite you or whatever, but
mosquito diversity.
yeah, but of non-enemy
Yeah,
flora and fauna, yes.
I'm trying to
And
maximize my mosquito, tick, and chigger diversity.
so, that there's this inherent connection that you build with it, but I think another way to look at it, and I actually talk about this with a lot of folks that I work with, these things are good indicators of where you're headed.
Absolutely.
You might see a change and a lot of people think of the plant community this way already, but I want to draw some parallels with the bird community. You can go out and do things, and then we have a suite of plants that if you start seeing them show up, we start realizing, okay, we're on the right track here.
Mhm.
The same is true with the bird community.
Mhm.
It is quite remarkable to me, honestly, how quickly the bird community just as a whole will completely change
Yeah.
in response to some sort of habitat treatment. I mean,
Yeah.
just completely overnight, it seems like completely different.
Yeah, I mean, it's to the point now where I think I've done enough like point counts and things like that, that I could probably get dropped off in a stand blindfolded and sit there and do a point count and have some concept of the structure of that forested stand by the
Yeah.
bird species that are present there.
Oh, yeah.
It's just, and I'm not saying that as like that is a remarkable skill. It's just that it's that predictable.
Yeah.
Like you
Like,
can,
if you provide particular composition and structure of
yeah.
plant, a suite of birds are going to show up.
Yeah, I mean, there's generalists, of course, right, that show up
Yeah.
everywhere, but there's certain species that
Yeah.
you're not gonna have in one area if a certain set of conditions is not present.
Yeah. And for I think one of the problems with the bird community is that skill for assessment is a little steeper of a learning curve. If you're not
Mhm.
really into birding, most people don't just know all the bird calls that they're hearing,
Yeah,
or necessarily even the ones you're seeing.
but with
And
the Merlin app now, I mean,
well, that's what I was gonna
they're
say. The Merlin app, that was one thing that really changed things for me because it made that accessible to me
yeah,
without having to go back and relearn all that. Because I did take ornithology 20 years ago, but I don't remember all of the things I'm hearing. I instinctually know, oh, wow, this is a different suite of birds, and I know my fair share of them, but, sometimes things are showing up, and I'm like, I don't know what that is.
yeah, I mean, you open the app and it sits there and tells you the species ID every time a bird calls,
Yeah,
and previously, before that existed, the closest thing to that you could have is an expert birder,
yeah.
standing right next to you to do that.
Yeah, like Chris Moorman, for example,
Right,
we've had on the show. He is a birder and
right.
has worked a large part of his career has been on land management as it relates to, non-game bird communities, although he's done plenty with turkeys and quail.
Yeah.
But I've turkey hunted with him a few times, including several of his first turkey
I
hunts.
know where this is going.
And the first turkey that he harvested was sitting beside me, and
Right.
we would be out there at prime time, and I mean, turkeys would be burning the woods down, and he'd be like, "Oh, did you hear that? There's an indigo bunting." And then, I'm missing gobbles because he's telling me about all the birds that are showing up, and I'm like, "Chris, there's only one bird we care about right now."
And no
But he
one
was
ever
hearing stuff that I didn't even know, like, it was just background noise to me,
yeah.
until he started pointing it out, but
There's a time and a place for everything, and
yeah.
sometimes it is
Well,
not the
that
time or the place to listen to those birds.
well, now looking back on it, man, I really appreciated it,
Yeah. Yeah.
Like, at the time, it was like, "Hey, I think a turkey just gobbled, and you won't quit telling me about this grasshopper sparrow."
Yeah.
But, I appreciated that, but now with this, Merlin app, I mean, that thing's phenomenal,
Yeah.
and I posted something on, one social media not long back where I just was I took a clip of it showing the different bird species that were responding to yeah, I think it was while I was turkey hunting, and I was in a open forest that was being managed really well, and I
Mhm.
just was taking a moment to soak it in because it was so loud and cool.
Yeah.
I got a clip of it, and it was, just 20 plus species of birds or something in
Yeah.
just, a minute clip. So I put it online, and then I don't even know how many people I sent the link to that app. So I feel like a lot of people out there would be interested if they knew it was accessible. There is an app called Merlin that's free that you can download on a smartphone, and it's really easy to use. And man, like I enjoy seeing that. So
And
anyway,
the funnest thing you can do with it is see if it identifies your calling as a turkey.
yeah, which I have done that too. It
I
when I hoot like an owl, it does say barred owl. So with my mouth, I mean. So yeah, but things like that can make it more fun, especially like if you're trying to get your kids involved and interested in it. Like those kinds of little things can help enhance the
Mhm.
situation.
I
My
used to
daughter
use
has
a
been really
different I used to use a different app, when I'd be turkey hunting, but it identified, like, anything that called or made a noise, and I had to switch over to Merlin because it kept calling me a tree frog when I'd call turkeys. I'm just kidding.
got the little the
That
little
was
wonk in there.
I figured I'd try that joke out and see, but
Well, it got me.
that was a lot of build up for not much payoff. Alright, so let's talk about what they did in this study.
Yeah. So this group I did this really cool study up in Wisconsin, and do you want me to say the name? I know the answer to that.
Of the author?
Yeah, Persche et al.
Oh, yeah, that's not a
Ma-
bad one.
Maya Persche, and it's Persche, and several others.
That wasn't too bad.
Yeah, they did this really cool study, very similar. That you even noted this when I showed it to you. They did some pretty similar work to some of the things we've done,
Mhm.
but they just had a different way of looking at it.
Yeah, they've got a different objective.
Yeah, and it's a really cool one. And when I saw it and kind of read through it, I was like, man, this is a really cool way to look at this. And also, this has pretty strong relevance for turkeys, especially in the vein of what we've been talking about with insects and poults.
You know what's surprising to me, and it may be surprising to some of our audience too, is we talk quite a bit about how the Southeast is a disturbance dependent ecosystem, right?
Hmm.
Well, I don't know. Maybe we haven't said that much on this show, but it is, and we talk about that a lot. And one thing I'm certain that we've talked about on this show before is how often that disturbance benefits turkeys.
Hmm.
Um, but this study was done in Wisconsin, and one thing that stood out to me as I was reading through the introduction, because I'm not as familiar with the literature from different regions of the country. I mean, I'll read a good bit of it, but not as much as I read from the southeast. Right? There's just no
Yeah,
way
and you
to
don't really
to
tune in like you
yeah,
do
yeah.
things about
But
these.
what's really interesting about this is in the introduction is how much evidence that they present showing that even in Wisconsin, it's
Hmm.
upper Midwest, how regular disturbance was even there
Yeah.
historically,
Yep.
and how the suppression of fire and other things have changed that successional trajectory over time and altered the species composition.
Yeah.
So it's something that I appreciate a lot about the South, but not as much about places,
Yeah.
like the upper Midwest
So
or the central hardwoods.
here's the quiz. Put you on the spot. You've read Sand County Almanac, Aldo
Hmm.
Leopold, and of course the shack where he wrote a lot of that, and a lot of his
Right.
observations is in Wisconsin, and they
Yep.
have a really strong history there for that in ecology. Do you remember when he was talking about the oaks in the savannah and fire, how important that process was? What he called the oaks?
No, I don't remember what he called them.
I don't either. Let's see if somebody in the audience.
Why even ask the question?
I thought you would remember. He called him like
That was a really good strategy though, because
the
you didn't
fortress.
remember it, so you posed it as a trivia, like, do you know?
Well, I didn't say that I remembered. No, he called them as I wanted to say fortress troops. It was something like that. That he was basically what the way he was describing it is they're constantly trying to invade this system, but the recurring fire keeps them
Hmm.
back, and they have this armor that the old trees can withstand, but you don't have a lot of regeneration because they haven't built that armor yet.
Right.
So he had a really elegant way of talking about it. It's been years since I read the book. I need to go back and do it again. I've probably
Same.
read it 15 times or more.
Yeah.
Uh, but it just kind of dawned on me when you were talking about that. He was describing these woodlands back in those days,
Yeah.
the early 1900s, and talking about the role fire played in those hardwood systems, and it just you know brought back that part of the memory. I can't remember
Yeah.
the name.
Yeah. I'll even I'll just it's just a couple sentences, but real quick, I'll read this to paint a picture for people. It says bluff tops and south sloping hillsides in the South Range were historically covered by oak woodlands in the unglaciated western portion and oak savannas in the east. Prairie fires were frequent in southern Wisconsin before settlement and likely extended infrequently into the woodlands on the South Range. Then they go on to say about they're talking about this area that was occupied by homesteaders in the 1800s, and that extensive forests were altered by logging, fire suppression, and plowing, with most oak savanna sites converted to agriculture. So I say all this to make the point that, when when some of our listeners hear us talk a lot about opening the canopy and how often we burn and things like that, I'm not saying that those disturbance regimes wouldn't change from Alabama to Wisconsin. They certainly would. But just because you're not in the deep South, it doesn't mean that you're not in an area that was formerly really disturbance dependent. So their goal was they wanted to take these areas, they were closed canopy forest, and they wanted to reduce the canopy and introduce fire and then follow the insect community. Is that the basic design?
Yeah, and they had 10 stands that they selected for the study, and 5 of them, they they were attempting to restore it to a woodland or savanna condition. So
Right.
that they were, I think, on average, we'll clip in, if you're watching on YouTube, we can clip in the figures for this so you can see it. But in the second figure, they showed kind of how they altered the stand structure. So if you think about these stands, they were closed canopy hardwood. They have an oak component in the overstory, but it's not all oak, right?
Mhm.
So if we take fire out of the system, a lot of the other stuff like maples and
And then probably just a typical hardwood forest most people are
yeah,
familiar with.
a lot of non-oak hardwoods were in the overstory after not being burned for decades. So what they did is, from what I can gather, they primarily went during the harvest, removed non-oak species.
Yeah, I just found
So,
it. They reduced canopy cover at to 53%. So it was 53% at the treated sites and then 80%
yeah,
at the reference sites.
yeah. So you can see in the B panel of the figure, if you're watching us, that's kind of illustrating that in that middle figure that they had it up around, the unthinned stands that they were not restoring were up around 80, and the ones that were restored were down below 60. So they were removing, 25 to 30% of the canopy in these stands.
Mhm.
And that was mainly non-oak, because if you look at the A part of that figure, if you're watching, you can see the composition of the restored stands. The overstory shifted hard to oak.
And that's just a mathematical response, right? They were killing or
Yeah, there's not
removing
more
non-oak.
oaks, but
Yeah,
more of the trees that are left are oak now,
that's right.
because they removed mainly non-oak species. So
And wouldn't hurt to interject right now, like we've talked about before. Those retained oaks could expand their crowns and increase acorn production.
that's right. Yep. And they talked about in the introduction, if you're interested, I think they did a great job covering the value of oaks,
Hmm.
not just from mass production, but from other angles as well in the system. A lot of those oak species are upland pyrophytic oaks, so in other words, they're fire loving. Their leaf litter is actually flammable and promotes fire, so that's an important part of this. A lot of the species that they were removing have leaf litter that is not conducive to burning, so it's obstructing you from doing that. And then,
Hmm.
of course, that additional sunlight getting in facilitates fire as well through drying out the leaf litter, and some of the plants that colonize are more flammable. So yeah, they thinned the stands, the ones they're restoring back to that condition. They thinned them, and then they started initiating fire. And as we would expect, and what you and I have both generated a lot of data like this in different kinds of stands, they substantially increased the composition in terms of species richness, the number of species present, and also the biomass in the understory of herbaceous species, so grasses and forbs.
Yep. Absolutely, as you would expect. Was there one thing I was going to ask? Was there anything unique about their fire prescription? Did they share much information about that, or was there anything that we
Yeah,
can glean that would be useful for folks?
um, I would say in terms of for our standard, it's relatively infrequent. Best I recall, I'm gonna go back and look at it to make sure I
Well, you
remember.
would expect it while you're looking for that. I'll just fill people in. Like you would expect it to be infrequent compared to our frequency because of the shorter growing season in Wisconsin compared to Alabama and Florida.
Yeah,
So, plants don't have as long to grow each year, so it would be a longer length of time before they get past their ideal structure and you need to reset it
yeah.
again.
So they probably could have gotten away with a 5-year return interval, for example, but they were
Right.
trying to maintain a 3-year interval or less.
Okay. Yeah. So
So
that's
pretty
that's
similar.
pretty well aligned with a lot of what folks do down here. So,
Yeah. Now
okay.
I will say they were in uh, on south-facing slopes in sandstone, and I'm not super familiar with the soils up there, but I think that's on the lower end of productivity. So we can get away with a little bit longer interval down here on poorer
On
sites.
deep sandy sites, yeah.
Yeah, so I don't know if that was something I'd have to go look up to see in this context, but yeah, so same, they're thinning to reasonable, reasonable stand density, and then burning relatively frequently, which is what we recommend all the time for all kinds of reasons. But they were not really interested in those, they were just kind of reporting this is how we change the stand structure and the vegetation response. They weren't focused on that like we usually are. Like we've
Mhm.
reported very similar data in different systems with similar treatments, but we were focused on the vegetation response.
That's right.
And that was kind of just, hey, by the way, this is how things changed to catch you up on that for what I'm about to tell you. That's kind of how they had the paper structured, at least the way I read it. So the next data that they presented was, I think, the meat and taters here for
Mhm.
turkeys. They actually were tracking the mean daily arthropod biomass, what they called it.
We're gonna have to unpack that one, I think.
Yeah, so basically,
Do
how much
what?
bug, how much bugs is there every
How
day?
many yeah, how much bugs? I like that.
Maybe
How many bugs there are?
how do I get bugs?
Yeah.
So they were basically tracking bug production in in the restored sites and comparing that over time, like through the summer. They measured it May through August. How they compare to one another. And what they found overall, the restored sites have substantially more biomass of insects available. And they were using, the way I understand it, some kind of trap that's capturing bugs that are mobile.
Mhm.
So, as opposed to some of the other literature, especially the literature related to turkeys, where it's been more of an active sampling, where you'd go in and like
Suck them up.
literally suck up all the
Yeah.
bugs in an area.
Yeah.
So a little bit different design, but I think those mobile insects are probably more important. The mobile insects in that herbaceous cover are more important to turkeys because
Yeah.
that's often what they're.
Yeah, I mean, if you watch, like, chickens feed, it's like
Yeah,
poults, they're looking
they're
around and
chasing down.
movement is catching their eye.
Yeah, they're chasing anything that moves down that they think they can fit down their gullet.
That's exactly right, and it looks like, looking at this figure, that, the insect biomass was about double,
Yeah.
on the site that was thinned and burned.
Yes. Yeah, substantially higher.
Mhm.
But that also, when it was much greater, you know, was important.
That's when it gets pretty. I mean, that
Yeah. So right at the beginning of May, the treatments aren't different from one another.
right.
Or maybe late April. I'm having trouble figuring out exactly what Julian day that is
So it would be,
because it's on Julian days on the
yeah,
figure.
so it would be, like, the 3rd week of May.
So that's like early Alabama.
Yeah, early Alabama. What?
I was going to measure dates in Alabama. So is that not?
I don't think it works that way. Keep trying.
We had several ratings on the podcast recently referring to measuring things in Alabama's.
That
So,
I mean,
yeah,
I mentioned that, and I mean, we were like, what, less than 10 episodes in, and that's still going. I can't believe it.
I know, I know. It was such a
So,
good.
so yeah, they didn't differ that much in May.
Yeah, so in early May, I guess they said they measured it May through August, so I should assume the beginning of the figure is May. Uh, yeah, so the treatments don't differ. They have the same amount of insects available, but by the time you get to late May, which happens to be right in the peak of brood rearing in a lot of the range,
Would you look at that?
isn't that something?
Hmm.
Uh,
It's
we
almost like
all of a
turkeys have
sudden are,
timed it like that for a reason.
yeah, it's crazy. It's crazy. Now that's when we have double the insect availability in
Yeah.
the restored area, the places that they were thinning and burning, double the insect community in that plant community. So not only do you have all that structure of vegetation, it's really important for the poult to navigate the landscape safely,
Yeah.
to, from exposure to predators or the elements, but also we've got twice as much food in there.
Yeah. So you've got that going for you. But to add to that even further, it looks like before the thinning and burning occurred, so when the area was still mature closed canopy forest, the peak was not only much lower, the peak in insect availability was not only
Yeah,
much lower, but it occurred much later.
yeah, that's right. And that peak isn't even approaching the lull. If you look
Mm.
at the graph, I know folks that are listening to us might get frustrated. We've got the paper linked in the show notes if you want to go look at it, or you can jump on YouTube and see us kind of describing this. But the you kind of have this peak in insect availability at late May into mid June, and then that starts to decline over the rest of the summer. But even in the restored area, even though it's declined over that time, it's the peak in the control stand that was not those stands that were not restored still doesn't approach the lull in the restored sites.
Yeah, the thinned and burned stands are as good on their worst day as the closed canopy stands are on their best day
Yes.
in terms of insect production.
Yeah. And we've talked about and we've had some questions about this, about concern with poults being born at different times and whether or not they would have enough insects.
Hmm.
There's a few things I think we can glean from this. One, we're setting the poults up and the hen that has that's trying to raise them. We're setting them up for success in this situation from every angle. Right? We've got the vegetation structure that protects them from things that can kill them, whether it's predators or exposure, and we're providing them a high abundance of available insects at the time that they need it the most, generally. But what I was going to say also, if you look at how fast insects decline over time, the rate of decline is much faster in the stands that were not restored. So, we're in a situation where it's sort of like this positive feedback, right? You provide all the resources at the right time, and you probably have more of the poults on the ground at the same time because you lost less nests and you're losing less poults, right? And
And your hens are in better body condition, so hopefully they're nesting earlier.
yeah, maybe
We don't have data that shows that happens, but it's reasonable
yeah.
to expect it.
Well, there is a couple of papers that show.
Oh, that's right, there are. Yeah.
There are two papers that show that hens with higher body weight nest earlier relative to others. But uh, yeah, so what I was kind of getting at is if there is concern about when poults are born and insect availability being a limiting factor for things that are late born, well, those are generally hens that are either re-nesting, well, probably mostly re-nesting. And in this situation, we're probably have higher nesting success because of better nesting cover. So
Hmm.
it'd be more synchronized, and the insect availability is not only more abundant, but synchronized at that same time.
That's right.
And if somebody does lose a nest, the insect availability late in the season is still much greater than it is in the stands that are not restored.
Hmm.
So I think, you could see how that could have a cumulative effect on reproductive success in that situation.
Absolutely.
And I think that's pretty important overall. I could see, just looking at this graph, and I don't know how many milligrams of biomass a turkey poult needs per trap per day. Like, I don't
Yeah.
know how it equates
Yeah.
necessarily. They may be able to survive on that lower insect
Yeah.
abundance. In other words, I don't know, but the restored condition looks a lot better.
Well, I mean, if
If
you
you're
look
trying to
at,
get them through that gauntlet, like, I'd
yeah.
much rather be in that condition.
Well, and if you go to the next figure, weren't able to directly document an improvement in things like nest success or poult survival or poult growth rates or anything like that. But my God, you can see the birds responded.
Yeah,
So they've got a
that's what
figure.
they are great indicators, and this is
Yeah,
exactly what I was talking about.
yeah. I mean, the avian species richness, so the number of species that they observed per site, definitely higher where they
Yeah,
thinned and
and
burned, and the
I
same
will
thing with the
add
density.
I will add that is the species richness, so the number of species of birds that specifically eat insects.
Yeah, that's a
That's
good
the
point.
insectivorous bird
So
community.
it's establishing the fact that they only looked at that guild is establishing that those birds likely were there because of the insects.
Yeah,
That they're
and
trying
just
to establish that mechanism.
yeah, just for folks out there, they were using ARUs to do this, and it's hard to track some species that aren't very vocal at that time of year,
Hmm.
and a lot of these bird species that they were picking up are, you know, they're loud. They're
Yeah.
singing a lot at that time. So, it doesn't include turkeys. I don't think. Actually, I didn't look at the species list. It could include turkeys. I'm not sure, but that's still pretty telling across the board. The avian, the community in terms of how many species and the density of birds across the board in every circumstance, the restored stands outcompeted the non-restored stands.
Yeah, so they had a greater number of species present and a greater number of overall birds on
Yes,
top of that.
that's right. So
Not
that's to me
not
pretty
seeing a whole lot
telling.
of downsides.
Yeah, things that like insects use those stands a lot.
Go to places where there's more insects.
And they're more available. Man, it's crazy how that worked out, isn't it?
You know?
So yeah, the next figure I think is this was kind of a really interesting angle for them because they started classifying it in a unique way that's kind of emerging right now, where we have all these tools now like these ARUs to really characterize sound,
Mhm.
and they were trying to characterize the soundscape is what they called it. And basically, what I gathered from it, especially during June, but going on into July, they said the soundscape was way more saturated. And what they
Mm.
meant by that is basically there's so many birds and they're singing so loud that it's like saturating the sound, and that it's just really really loud.
You know what I like my soundscape saturated with?
Turkey gobbles.
That's exactly right.
Doesn't happen.
I like a saturated
Yeah.
soundscape.
That was one of the things I said in the reel. I was like, "Well, I guess it may be harder to hear a turkey gobble in there, but there ought to be more doing it."
There ought to be more of them. And you know what is interesting about this is it kind of goes hand in hand, or not kind of, but it does go hand in hand with Matt Day's thesis work, where he showed that positive association between the percentage of a property that was in early successional cover and the gobbling activity on that property.
There you go. Yep. You put those two data points together, and we're there. More turkeys gobbling, and
Yeah.
when there's more early succession.
Yeah, and I mean, we couldn't say it in the paper. You don't know if you're hearing more gobbling on those properties just because the gobblers are drawn to those
Yeah,
areas, or if it's because we're actually making more turkeys on those areas.
right.
But I think, based on this paper, it stands to reason that it's probably both. There's
Yeah,
things
that's
that,
what I was gonna say, this is, I think, a fairly strong argument that you probably are seeing both.
yeah,
So, that's a good point. But, I mean, this stuff gets me excited. Like, this is something that most people that have a little bit of property can get out and get something done to influence the reproductive success of their population,
hmm,
right? This is something that, it's practical, that, get more sunlight on the ground and more fire on the ground to stimulate this kind of plant community response, and these things come with that.
undeniable.
Yeah. So I do think there's some things that I would like to do with turkeys related to this. I think uh, translating this into turkey productivity would be really cool.
That's
And
the
in
gold standard.
particular, as I start thinking about that phenology, I mean, based on the way that they saw insects, we can glean from that having more insects available when most poults should be on the ground really in need of them
Right,
is probably good.
right.
But I start to wonder about that runaway process, you know, when there's not good cover and you have later nest attempts because more turkeys re-nest, and then those poults are smaller later in the season, and then they don't have very good cover and there's less bugs. Like, you start to see how that could run away and really affect things, and I would really like to start exploring some of that stuff.
Yeah. And I think that's important to encourage people to think about when habitat's good, populations work well for all the reasons, and when habitat is bad, they don't work. They work poor. They perform poorly for all the reasons.
Yeah.
I mean, it's like bad habitat influences turkey populations negatively for a whole host
Yeah, and probably
of
higher
factors.
predation on top of it.
I know. I mean, we've covered that so many times on here, but I just think it's one of those points that bears repeating.
Yeah. So, a couple of things. Well, I wanted to ask you a question. I know you talked a little bit about your habitat work that's coming up, where you're going to look at various things. Are you guys planning on looking at insects at all?
No, that's not part of the plan currently.
Okay. Well, it might be worthwhile.
We have thought about it. Um,
Is it just a capacity thing?
yeah, and the other thing too, and this is pertinent to the study that we just covered too. In the interest of full transparency, I didn't know if we'd go into this or not, but I will. Um, the one breakdown in our logic, when we say that we believe this would lead to better performing turkey populations, is, and I still believe that way, but we can't say with certainty that the insects that were being provided on that site before the treatment was implemented were inadequate to allow that population to perform at its maximum reproductive and
Yeah.
survival rates,
We
right?
don't know that it's a limiting factor.
Yeah, yeah, we can't say that. And that is what poses the challenge for collecting insect data as a function of habitat management treatments in a study like mine is, okay, so let's say that I find, 600 units of insects over here and 300 over there. Well, can I really say that the 600 unit area is better? Well, intuitively it is, but we don't know, like, once you get
Well, I
over.
think you are collecting other data that's
Sure,
paired with it that would strongly, like, if you see more a higher turkey use,
sure,
particularly during poult rearing in the higher insect,
right.
we would then infer that it's better.
If you had that data too, that would definitely be helpful in sorting it out. But we don't always know that. I mean, like, to
Yeah,
go back to that example and finish my analogy, like 300 units may be adequate. Like changing it to 600 may not improve anything.
right.
So, and that's why it's been difficult for me to decide whether or not to collect that insect data. Is I don't. It's hard to know what to do with it sometimes But I
Yeah.
think you could make the same argument about vegetation too, which I'm obviously measuring.
Yeah. Well, I think that what makes it relevant is the animal use or
Mhm.
production, if you can
Yeah.
measure production.
Yeah.
So if they are seeking it out to use, and now those data are supplementing you're getting a better idea of how to explain why they chose to use it.
Sure.
Right, which might be various things. In this case, we're talking about the vegetation structure may be easier to navigate and more protective from predation and the elements and provide more insects. And it
Right.
may be all of those things influencing the choice to use it. So you're not necessarily pinning it, perfectly on one thing. The reality is probably a collection of factors influencing it. On
Agreed.
top of other things that might not even be related to habitat, like, you know,
R
social dominance or,
right.
things that could be going on that we don't even really have a handle on,
That's right.
when it's happening out there. So, I one, I haven't talked about it that much, but we are working right now. I have funding in place, and I'm working closely with Tall Timbers Research Station, and we are trying to do a pulp imprinting study starting this coming spring. And so think, illumination of the flatwoods, except we're going to have it in an experimental design to try to
Mhm.
evaluate habitat management. And this really caught my interest for that because we could start to get at some of these questions with pulp performance as it relates to these things and start to try to iron out, well, at what point does it not matter if you have more insects?
I am beside myself with enthusiasm for starting to be able to play with those poults.
Yeah,
I mean,
man,
just
yeah, I got a postdoc hired. She is super excited about it, and we
yeah.
we have the funding. It's
So many
really about getting,
questions. So
yeah,
many questions, man. And
we
just being able to compare one practice to another, and I can start to give landowners that answer. It's like, how should I manage this
yeah,
field? It's like, well, if you do that, the poult's going to grow fastest and fly the earliest.
yep.
That is
If you
so
do this,
valuable.
they're going to die. Yep, that's exactly it. We're trying to develop that information further from what is in the literature, and I have other things on the horizon as well, but I'm very excited about that.
Yeah.
Another note, I don't know if I think I've told you about this, but you remember when we had the equal or no, what did we call it? Habitat management equals predator management.
Yeah.
That episode, and
Yeah.
it
Yeah.
you know
Well, that was the one
for
thing
us,
that we didn't
kind
even
of like,
say about this study that we talked about today is,
yeah,
hypothetically based on that one, you would expect predators to be reduced in that area too.
yeah, their abundance would be lower. So you can see
Mhm.
how that could really start to add up to a lot of turkey. You're right, like that. We're talking about a lot of difference from
Mhm.
so many different angles.
How many Alabama's worth of turkeys?
Man, you know what? I think we need 4 or 5 Alabama's worth of turkeys just in Alabama. So, but anyway, the paper that we covered, I reached out to the authors, and they have agreed to share that data set on turkeys. So we're going to go back and
Ooh.
model turkey responses to fire and the predator community.
Oh my
And I'm
god.
super excited.
That's gonna be
So we're
so
gonna be able to
cool.
kinda iron out how are turkeys responding to the different fire regimes, and how much of that is driven by the vegetation community versus the predator community.
Yeah. That is so cool.
So that's gonna be really fun. But
Yeah.
we got to talk a lot about all the cool stuff you've got coming up and just finishing and everything the other day. We didn't talk much
Yeah.
about the stuff I have on the horizon.
Did
So
we talk about that on the air? Or are you talking about offline?
I think we
All that
no,
cool
like 2 or
stuff.
3 episodes ago, we shared a lot of things that you had on the horizon, I think.
Yeah, yeah.
So, yeah, I'm pretty excited about some of those things coming down the pike because, it's going to be good information to, make a lot of turkeys.
Mhm.
So, really exciting.
And I've got that other exciting one, that we've been talking about the newest one.
Oh yeah.
Yeah,
Oh,
that one's
I haven't even announced
no,
mine either on that same front.
no, we haven't talked about either of those.
Yep. Should we save it?
No, yeah, let's keep that one under our hats for now. But
Okay.
I think y'all are gonna be excited about it.
Yeah. Well, um, I think one thing that hopefully people will appreciate out there, we've been trying our best to go through the literature as objectively as we can and point out places that we have strong information, places that are weak, that we could really use some study. And we're starting to see, and I don't know if it's because of us or not, but we're starting to see some of those things come online elsewhere. And we also have been able to find ways to get some of these aspects going on things that we really,
That's right.
really need.
That's right.
So exciting times, exciting times. Uh, anything else that we didn't cover on this research?
Not that I can think of.
I feel like I had like this really strong point to make and I forgot
I feel like that's the story of my life. I've had this really strong point to make for 39 years, and I just
it. Never have been able to
never been
pin
able
it down. Yeah.
All right, so we have something to give away today.
Oh,
Yeah.
go on.
Okay. I'm trying to pull it up.
You know what? I have some stuff as well in my office.
You know what the problem is with this is I'm now at the point where I have communication on too many different places and too many different devices, and I don't know which one to look in. All
Yeah.
right. Okay. Yep. Here we go. So Grounded brand again. So this is our third Grounded brand item to give away. Thank you, Drew, once again. So today it's our listeners are is playing the correct term? I guess they're not playing. They're not doing anything active in this. It's all passive drawings, right? But I wanted to say
They
they're
have to
playing.
actively reach out if
They're
they have to
playing for a
actively
hat,
listen to know they won.
right? So yeah, a Grounded brand hat is in our giveaway today.
Nice.
So do you have a listener picked up?
No, I thought you were doing that. Is that not what you're working on?
I am working on it right now.
You were just making sure I didn't work on it first.
Exactly. Oh man, it looks like we're getting a lot more new feedback, and it seems like I don't know if have you looked at them in a few days?
No, I haven't.
It looks like people have been really happy that we're covering some of the habitat management stuff here lately.
Oh,
So that's
good.
good to know.
Well, this one ought to be a powerful one because I feel like the insect component, we keep talking about it, and we also have been talking about it being a concern. We've been bringing up the cicadas over and over again, and how you add cicadas and get turkeys.
Yep.
And here it is. This is a really strong data set to show that, you know, restoring woodlands and adding fire promotes high insect abundance at the time that poults need it most.
Yep. Absolutely. All right. I've got a winner, Matt from Missouri. If you'll reach out to us, either me or Marcus, email would be preferred. Look us up. Google search. You should be one of the first couple links that comes up to find our email, or of course, direct messenger would be okay too. But you might get caught up in the spam filter there, so watch out for that.
Yeah.
Can you watch out for a spam filter? How do you keep an eye out for that?
I don't know. Apparently, it's activated on my email and my Instagram and
Right. So
whatever
Matt,
other
Matt
platform
from
we have.
Missouri, reach out to us and claim that Grounded brand hat.
Yeah, very cool. Well, I have some stuff to give away also, not this time, but when you run out of the gear that you have to do it, then I can take over and give away a few things as well.
Well, next week we'll have a shirt. So y'all make sure and get those ratings and reviews in and get a chance to win that shirt and whatever it is Marcus is teasing.
I have hats and shirts and calls.
Okay. I thought you said a Benelli shotgun. I must have been mistaken.
Oh, I won that one, actually.
I thought you were going to say that's for 2 weeks from now.
No, I did a rating, and we just randomly selected it.
Okay.
I'm kidding. No, there's no Benelli shotguns. I wish there were. I would give it away.
Oh.
Just because I'm that thankful. I'm
Yeah.
that thankful that people are still listening and supporting us.
Yeah. Well, I better leave a rating and review if we get one.
Yeah. Get the wives to do it.
Who's this? Gil Woolsby? What? All right. We'll see, man.
Good. See y'all later. Appreciate it.
Wild Turkey Science is part of the Natural Resources University podcast network and is made possible by Turkeys for Tomorrow, a grassroots organization dedicated to the wild turkey. To learn more about TFT, check out turkeysfortomorrow.org.